This week on Writers, Inc.
On the basis of dropping out of 2 colleges where I'd taken safety majors, I realized, this is the only thing I'm remotely good at. Like, I suck at everything. Like, I'm just not good at it. I can play a little pool, but that's about it. And so I just said, this is it. I got, my track was defined by that point. There was no place for me to step off. There was no place for me to say, hey, maybe I'll go try that. Maybe I'll go try that. I couldn't try any of those things because I wasn't good at anything. Only good at thinking stuff up and writing it down. That's pretty much it. And once I made that decision, because I'm from such a working class background, and it was such a leap, nobody became a writer where I came from. Because it was such a leap, I knew I couldn't fail. That was it. I was all in. I was breakneck. And so the one thing that everybody who I ever was in school with talks about, it's the one word that comes back over and over and over again. The thing that separated me from the rest of the pack, it wasn't talent, it wasn't craftsmanship, it wasn't ability, it was focus. It was focus. I wanted it.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie on a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories. All have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hey everybody, this is Patrick O'Donnell.
And JP Reinflush.
And Kevin Tumlinson.
And this is JD Barker. Welcome to Writers, Inc. So we were talking motorcycles.
Yeah, we were.
The only person who has
yes.
we just decided we're going to start hitting the record button a little bit sooner because we start talking about all this stuff and it's like we know the entire world would be completely riveted by this incredible entertainment, but we don't record any of it. So we're going to just start recording. But JP was very quiet through all this motorcycle talk, and it makes me wonder, like,
I have nothing to relate to. That's why.
Never rode a motorcycle, never owned a motorcycle.
My dad had to tip it a few times. Super fun. I actually learned how to drive on 4-wheelers. Fun fact. That's my life.
All right. I spent a lot of time on 4-wheelers when I was a kid. Well, actually 3-wheelers when I was a kid. The 4-wheeler, that wasn't around yet.
Ozzy Osbourne had an unfortunate incident with the 3-wheeler.
Everybody did. That's why they stopped making 3-wheelers.
That's why they stopped making them. Yeah.
Yes. Well, who knows what Ozzy was doing beforehand?
Those things would roll for like literally no reason.
Kevin's got a very iconic motorcycle. He has a Triumph Bonneville. That just ups your coolness by like 10 degrees, dude.
Yeah, and nothing says cool like an English bike.
Well, I've got the opposite. I've got the Harley Davidson Street Bob that I didn't realize that was like the official bike of the Sons of Anarchy, and I really didn't know that. And they're like, "Oh, you were just getting that because of SOA," and I'm like, no, I like the mini ape hangers, and it's a lot of fun to drive.
All right. So question for Kevin is the English bike as much like you have to work on it as often as you do an English car? Like I had an MG when I was younger and it was constantly getting worked on. There was something was breaking like every 2 hours.
I haven't had that experience yet, but I've only had it just not even 6 months. So it's still relatively new to me.
Let me ask you this, Kevin. Do you have the urge to ride on the left-hand side of the road when you're in your English motorcycle? When you're riding your English motorcycle?
I do, but I compromise and ride right in the middle.
Oh, perfect. That's very safe.
All right, so maybe hitting the record button early was a bad idea.
No, this is gold, baby.
We'll let the audience decide. Yeah,
exactly. Let the people decide. Damn it.
Yeah, right. I mean, if you don't relate, you can just judge everyone, which is what I was doing. So it's fine.
I just picture JP. He's all quiet and he's sitting there typing. He's probably on a Discord or something right now, chatting with somebody. Just like, well, I don't know why the hell. Why am I sitting here? Why am I talking to these guys?
They're talking about motorcycles now.
I've done my time. I'm off this show.
Definitely did not message Christine.
Hey, we're motorcycle writers. That's what we are. Motorcycle writers.
Ooh, wow. Very punny. Very punny, Kevin.
Oh, boy. All right. JP, what's in the news? The real news.
I'm ready for AI.
Let's talk AI. Is everyone ready for their drink of choice?
Bring it on.
All right. So In a wonderful podcast, The Creative Pen, Joanna Penn talked about this, and I wanted to bring it up here as well, that Amazon has announced new tools for building with generative AI. This is pretty important, especially because of all of the talks about AI and the fact that Amazon is now launching their own AI platform with several different programs. Just means that AI is here. It's going to stay. A lot of their programs involve things like content creation, book summaries and descriptions, personalizations, recommendations, using things like customer support with AI. Basically, their tools can do a whole ton of a lot of things for authors, for anyone that is interested in using AI. I was curious what your guys' thoughts were.
I did some digging on this. So first of all, the big difference that I could find is you can actually train the model yourself. So you can create, a closed environment. You could train it, as an author, you could take all of your books and dump just your books in there. And then that would be the model that it uses based on the engine behind it. So, I think that's strong from a content standpoint, because now you don't have to worry about, you're not stealing anything from anybody anymore. But we still have the same problem, if you want to use it, because from a copyright standpoint, the copyright law requires that the text is written by a human. They don't care, whether it's based on your model or somebody else's model or where it's pulling the data from. It has to be written by a human in order to get that copyright. So that problem hasn't gone away yet, and that doesn't mean that it won't. But that's my main reason for staying away from it. So until they check off that box, I really won't play with it.
Yeah, we listened in on the the entire DDD team listened in on the Copyright Office's little live stream webinar thing yesterday. It was like 2 or 3 hours of experts coming in and talking about and giving their perspective on this stuff. It's really interesting to hear how widely the perspectives vary. They more or less fall into two camps of, there's the one camp that says, you're stealing from creators just by scraping this content, and there needs to be some attribution and some compensation. And then there's the other camp, which I think I'm more in, which is the, what's done is done kind of camp. Like, it's there, the genie's out of the bottle, it's not going in. I think something like, having a tool that does this yourself is going to go along. I really want to see where this evolves to, because from my perspective, if I am in total control of the tool, it's a different animal now, and I literally should be able to copyright that work under my own name if I'm using only my stuff to train it. So, that's my perspective on it. Now, there's all kinds of loopholes and holes and issues to deal with there, but I think this is not over. The conversation's not over.
No.
There's so much happening. So.
No.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy to get into a doom and gloom mindset, especially when you hear things like one person announcing they're going to publish 10,000 books this year through AI. And that definitely means there are others right behind them planning on the same thing. But I think that not looking at what opportunities exist with AI, and at least not becoming familiar in what possibilities you could do with AI, is a potential pitfall that I would strongly recommend someone at least educate themselves on what AI is capable of doing and seeing how it can or cannot interact with their plan and their author business.
Yeah, it can't hurt. I mean, I personally had ChatGPT. I had it open on my second monitor for weeks, and when I needed to brainstorm something, and basically anytime I felt like I was going to go to Google to research, I would hit ChatGPT at the same time just to see what type of difference I got in the two different things. And, like you said, it can't hurt to mess with it. Definitely be familiar with it. You don't want to, just shy away from it just because it's the big unknown off in the corner somewhere. At least, if you're going to decide you don't like it, at least, make that an informed decision.
I shared this on Twitter. I think I was actually commenting in one of Joanna Penn's tweets about it, but the silos that I see this being useful for publishing, let's just ditch the idea of it writing the book for you. I mean, let's step away from that. I use AI to generate imagery for my covers, and I manipulate that imagery. I'm using it as a stock library, and I take the different images and I melt them together into something in Photoshop, right? So I think cover design is going to be one of those pain points solved by AI for the indie author, at least, and maybe all publishers. If you can feed your stuff in there and get a synopsis of your book, that takes care of things like your book description. If you want to, there's some benefit to using this for helping with editing. Maybe just even if it's just spotting grammar issues or inconsistencies, parallelism that you intended but isn't there, that sort of thing. This can help with that as a round of editing. And then there's things happening on the like video side of this. You could potentially use AI to generate some either just marketing materials in terms of video and audio, or even convert this into like a short mini film or something like that. And then of course there's the audio stuff. You can get a narrator for practically nothing, if anything. So I think there's definitely a range of tools. There's a bucket of tools here that authors can benefit from. My worry is that in trying to head off the potential problems that people have conjured, we're going to end up limiting ourselves and not getting as much use out of these tools as we could get. So that's my hang up.
Yeah. And many of those tools are in some form or fashion freely available to at least trial, to test out. And I think that it would be a misstep to not at least familiarize yourself in what it can do for the future. Okay, so next up on the list is how Barnes & Noble bounced back. So we kind of talked about this before with the previous bit of news about Barnes & Noble kind of coming back and being profitable in the first quarter of this year, I believe. We have a little bit more information about this, and it looks like the strategy has really been about making the approximately 600 stores become more like independent bookstores with their unique curation and focus on local communities. Hint, hint, take a drink there about community. But I think really the interesting part about this article was just kind of how Barnes & Noble is trying to reinvent the corporate aspect of their business to be more of that local branch for that community, and really focusing and embracing on things like TikTok and the younger generation to help promote those books. So of course I have my own opinions about local, but I want to hear you guys' take on this.
I think it's great. I mean, they're following the same model that they did with Waterstones in the UK, and it obviously worked there. I mean, our local Barnes & Noble is selling everything other than livestock at this point. They try everything for like a week or two, and if it doesn't work, it's gone. Like every time I walk in there, they've got something different going on. But it is kind of refreshing. I'm hoping they're going to find some type of middle ground, because there's also something very refreshing about walking into a Barnes & Noble anywhere in the country and basically finding the same store. Like it's almost like being home, I guess, and to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So they need to find something, I think, that falls in the middle of that. But they're definitely getting closer. I'm seeing crowds in there when I go in now that weren't there, 3-4 months ago.
I'm really interested to see where their focus on like that local bookstore is planning on going, because one of the things that has really happened in my area that I've kind of taken the initiative on and formed a writer group on is our local bookstore hosting events that really highlight multiple authors at one time, or helping and sponsoring different events like that. And I'm really curious to see, with this new focus on local, how that will interplay with local authors, potentially local libraries, because I really think that there is a strength and a power that comes with like bookstores, libraries, writers, and other creatives kind of coming together and really putting faces to those names in that area. So I'm really curious to see if Barnes & Noble has any plans to do anything like that, because I think that would be pretty cool.
Well, it's good and bad, right? Because right now the indie bookstores are doing well because they have all of these things, and Barnes & Noble doesn't. It helps distinguish them and helps them bring people through the doors. And if Barnes & Noble decides that they're going to start doing all these things that are working well for the local indie stores, that might hurt their business, which I wouldn't want to see either.
Yep, also true.
Yeah, so I'll have to see where it goes.
All right, last on the list. Writers Guild of America members vote overwhelmingly to authorize a strike if there is no deal by May 1st. So we're talking like 98% were in favor of the potential strike. And the strike would basically include demands about increased compensation, residuals, etc. and kind of re-looking at things like discrimination, harassment, and pay equity. So basically, if they can't strike a deal for a new film and TV contract not by May 1st, then they plan to basically do the strike. So I think the last strike hadn't happened since 2007, if I'm not mistaken, or has there been one since then?
That sounds about right, actually.
Yeah, the thing is, I've got a couple of projects that are being shopped right now, and the strike is more or less on. I mean, they haven't actually flipped the switch yet, but the problem is everybody is geared up for it. So all the studios are like, well, the strike is 2 weeks away. All the writers are, strike is 2 weeks away. So like nobody is willing to do anything right now because of the strike looming over everybody, which kind of sucks. It's going to impact a lot of things that we're going to see down the road. Shows that are in production now, things are going to get halted. New content coming out is going to dry up.
Yeah.
But there's a reason for it. It's got to happen. Like these people aren't being compensated properly for what they're doing. And unfortunately, this is the resolution. So we all have to deal with the consequences.
I am, of course, constitutionally against guilds, but no, that's not quite true. I mean, I appreciate what's going on here, and the whole unionization and that sort of thing has some benefits. I do worry though, like sometimes these things get weaponized against these industries. I don't think that's the case here because, the motion picture industry is notorious for really kind of screwing over writers in particular. So hopefully we see some, what I want to see though is like actual lasting impact. Because this recurs over and over again, as you said, JP. Like the last one was, a few decade or so ago. But I remember in the 80s, like there was that era where everyone went on strike, and all the shows that I loved turned to garbage overnight, and a lot of them failed. I remember actually an episode of Moonlighting where they were making fun of the whole strike and saying, don't blame us. Everyone's on strike, so they broke the fourth wall over it. But, you hate to see it. The people who are getting hurt by this financially are the writers. The people who long-term get hurt by this are those of us who would have enjoyed that content or bought that content. And maybe that's a well-wah kind of hurt, but
right.
Yeah, I hate to see these things.
I
hate the whole thing.
I think too, like the numbers that came with this data really goes to show that it's clear that there are demands that are not being met. I mean, when you have 97.85% of the people authorizing the strike, and you have almost 80%, 78.79% of eligible Writers Guild of America's members participating in that vote, that's so many of those members that are just like, we need change and no one's listening. So hopefully change happens because of this.
This episode is brought to you by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. AutoCrit takes you far above standard grammar checking or cookie cutter guidance. Instead, it's like having an experienced editor in your genre watching over your shoulder to help you deliver great writing that keeps your audience trapped in the story. You can even compare your writing style to more than 100 best-selling authors right down to the word level, so you can see what the best in the business do to keep their storytelling clean, clear, and crisp. Listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can now take advantage of lifetime membership for one single fee. That's right, no renewal fees.
Hi, this is JD Barker. I've used AutoCrit for years, and not only has it improved my writing, but it's been a crucial tool with aspiring authors that I've mentored. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just beginning, it'll help you find your weak spots and weed them out. Give it a shot with your latest project. Trust me, your editor will thank you.
Head to autocrit.com/JD to get your lifetime membership. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show. Well, that actually brings up, JD, a question that I have just been dying to ask you, which is, who's up this week?
Oh man, now I really miss Christine.
Christine, come back!
Try.
Come on,
come back! Kevin can't do it.
Oh, what?
Yeah. This week we've got somebody that I don't know if I've even heard him on a podcast before. But we've got the incredibly talented Dennis Lehane, author of Mystic River, Shutter Island, Gone Baby Gone. His latest book is called Small Mercies, and it releases April 25th. So here he is, Dennis Lehane.
Dennis Lehane, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
You bet. The beginning of Small Mercies, which is your newest book, and we will talk about that a little bit later in the show, you describe Mary Pat's house down to the ashtrays, the tube TV. I tell you what, I felt like I was in a time machine going back to my childhood in the South Side of Chicago. It was awesome. Yeah, and I just sat back and I even like closed my eyes and I'm like, oh my God, I could smell the cigarettes. I could smell the whiskey and the stale beer and, whatever was cooking in the kitchen. And, like I said, I was from the South Side of Chicago.
There's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, because, it was that took me back. So I just wanted to say thank you. And, it's funny, it's talking about tube TVs. I haven't heard that term in a long time. And in another part of the book, you call it the boob tube. And I haven't heard that forever. Oh, my. So, you really paint the picture, at the beginning of the book. Do you do that with every book that you write? Or was it pretty important to this story? You're setting the stage, obviously.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to an era that I remember I started the book with her getting up and walking into her day with the power off in her housing project apartment. And that wasn't accidental that the power's off. But it's this idea. I think there's a metaphor that plays throughout the book about, loss of power. And but then as she moves through the apartment, I was like, what were those apartments like back then? And I do remember, I remember so well walking into friends' houses and the ashtrays everywhere, or going to visit other friends, and the morning ritual was to clear the beer cans, get rid of the beer cans. And I don't know, it's just it was less. My mother was very fastidious and was a strong anti-smoker by the time I was born, because she had quit.
Okay.
So it wasn't something that I saw necessarily in but my brothers were upstairs. We lived in a split house, and we had a second, third story where my brothers were, and they were up there chain smoking nonstop, and they were clearing the beers, whatever. And so I think it was just, I remember that time. I remember the time where everybody smoked and everything smelled like a cigarette. And I remember all the different types of ashtrays. There was the I don't know if you remember, there were these ones that were kind of filled with sand.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, women tended to have those, right?
Yep.
Something feminine about them. And then there were the snap purses that the women held their cigarettes in.
Yes.
And then there were the ashtrays, the black plastic ones that you had the little notches in, so you could put your cigarette in and just leave it smoldering, and then you had the glass ones, and it was just, and the other glass ones on the stands, on the brass stands,
I was just going to say, my grandpa had one on a stand, and I thought it was cool because you hit a button and the ashes would collapse.
Yes.
Yes. The center would,
Yep.
It was like two pieces, and the hinge would open like a trap door. And and I'm just like, wow, that's cool. And it's funny because both my parents come from smoking families, and they never smoked. They didn't like it, which is good. They're both 83. That's probably why, one of the reasons. Yeah. And it was just, I'm trying to explain this stuff to my kids, and they're looking at me like, I have a cyclops eye or something. It's like, people were smoking like that inside their houses. I'm like, yeah, like chimneys. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And now it's like, my daughters, if they'll be like, what's that? Oh. And it's like some guy smoking, like on a street corner. We're talking about, and you notice it now, where, you would notice the opposite when I was a kid.
Right.
Exactly. If you walked into a bar and it didn't smell like an ashtray, it was like, what's going on in here?
It's not a real bar. Yeah, it's definitely not a real Irish bar if there's no smell of smoke.
Yeah, so that opening sequence was, again, me just trying to, I'm orienting the reader, I'm orienting myself, I'm locking the characters in, and then a lot of details are coming out of that. They're super important. That that she hasn't been paying her bills. Her daughter is getting very nervous about her first day of school. She's about to be bussed. And the local Irish mob is coming around. They're underwriting the anti-busing campaign, which was true. That's how it was done in South Boston in 1974. And and Mary Pat's kind of part of it all.
Right. So there's another quote in the book that I laughed out loud when I read it. It's about every Southie coming out of the womb with a Schlitz and Lucky Strikes. And I tell you what, I did literally laugh out loud. If I was drinking something, it would be spewing out of my nose. I'm like, oh my God, this guy is awesome. I laughed my butt off. And I was thinking, it's like, did you do that very intentionally to like grab the reader's attention? Because that's not something you see in a book or like TV or movies like these days.
No, I don't know. There's this voice, this narrative voice that is the closest voice there is to the sort of collective voice that I grew up with around me. If you had the hive voice, if you will, and it's dark. And it's sometimes heartless, and it's sometimes super warm and compassionate, and it has these great throwaway lines. And that voice, I've tapped into 3 times. It's the voice that tells the story of Mystic River. It's the voice that tells the story of The Drop, and it's the voice that tells the story of Small Mercies. And that voice it's a very free voice for me. I get to play with a lot of nuance and a lot of emotion and a lot of different emotional pitches, and I get to be funny. But the funny is Dorchester Southie inner city funny, which is kind of funny and heartless at the same time. So
yes, but yeah, I did laugh out loud, just so you know. Do you expect any backlash from those types of things in your books?
The backlash in this book certainly is going to come from. This book is an all-out attack on concepts of white supremacy. I mean, I think it's a rage against racism, and it's going to get some pushback, I'm sure, from people like that.
So what do you say to somebody pushing back? And it's like, well, there's like sensitivity readers, et cetera. What I was talking about, coming out of the womb with a Schlitz and Lucky Strikes. Yeah. Do you foresee anything that way?
No, I don't care.
Okay. That's awesome.
Take a joke, man. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I'm a big believer in the safe spaces for the genuinely oppressed. I am not a big believer in safe spaces for people who don't need them or don't require them.
So when you're writing a novel, are you thinking, TV or movie, anything like along those lines?
I don't think anything like that when I write a novel, because and I thought maybe as I got more into this space I would, but the truth is that the space being, I write a lot of TV now and movies, but the simple fact of the matter is they are so different from each other that outside of a baseline of narrative DNA, they don't share anything in common. They just really don't. I don't find them. Writing a script is like writing a blueprint. You're writing for 225 people who are going to be in charge of making that film or making that TV show, right?
Right.
Everybody from the art department to the gaffers to, everybody's going through and breaking their notes on the script about what affects their position on the film crew. So you're not writing to be precious, and you're not writing to be read, and you're not writing to be remembered in the same way. When you're writing a novel, you're trying to connect, I always say, with one person, one reader. They're in your head. And that's the person you're telling the story to. And then that person will metastasize into a collective readership. But when you're starting to write, it's just one person in your head. And it's a very intimate relationship. And it's a very difficult thing to pull off, to be honest with you. Writing books is hard.
It is.
I think anything that is done well is hard. But writing books are particularly hard. And, I remember when I was shooting this TV show I did last year called Blackbird, I remember everything going south on us. I remember it was blazingly, insanely hot. We had lightning strikes pretty much every day, COVID outbreaks. We're in just the heart of southern Louisiana. And we had so many things going on. We had personality clashes. We had personnel problems. We had every single thing. And I remember, and we're trying to balance all this, and we're trying to make a show, a TV show, and we're spending a lot of money to do it. And as hard as it was, I remember feeling like still not as bad as the middle of a novel.
Gotcha. So when you write a book and eventually it does become a screenplay, which has happened to you on more than one occasion, how involved do you want to be with that movie?
It depends. Early on, not at all. What I controlled early on was who I sold it to. And I was very particular about that. But then once I did it, go with God. I trust you. I chose to sell it to you because I like your work. I didn't sell to studios. I sold to specific producers or directors. And that worked out great. That worked out really well on Gone Baby Gone. It worked out really well on Shutter Island. It worked out really well on Mystic River. With The Drop, I was involved. I was hands-on. And I was a producer. I was a writer. I was very involved. Now I find it highly unlikely that I would sell one of my books to anybody, unless I was in control. It's just pointless. So for Small Mercies, I sold it to Apple TV, who happens to be my employer right now.
Okay.
And I sold it to them with the idea that I am going to run it, that I'm going to create it, that I'm going to run the show, that I'm going to probably direct several of the episodes. It's mine.
Now, how much directing have you done? I believe you've directed one movie, correct?
I directed one movie many years ago. Yeah. You do a lot of directing. How do I put this? I need to put this very delicately. Nah,
come on.
We had circumstances when I was doing shows in the past where the actors were not necessarily vibing with the director.
Okay.
And you end up as a showrunner, you're everybody's daddy. You have to take care of everybody. And there would be circumstances where I would have to be the director. And not the director of record, and by any means. And I'm not telling anybody where to place the camera. I'm talking about eliciting performance from actors in a way that they feel comfortable, in a way that they feel understood. And once you do that enough, you start to go, well, the hell with it. I'll probably just do this.
Sure.
And there's been very friendly pressure to get me to direct. People direct. So,
I was watching Mystic River a couple of nights ago, which I absolutely love. And the cast was just spot on, I thought.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, it's like, how can you not think of these actors while you're writing the book? I would think it's like,
not at all.
Really?
No, it's Sean Penn's great in Mystic River, but he's his Jimmy Marcus. Well, Jimmy Markham in the movie. Jimmy Marcus in the book. And that's Jimmy Marcus in the book is mine. He doesn't even look anything like Sean Penn.
Okay.
The most famous example, I would say, for me, is Casey Affleck as Patrick Kenzie. That is the exact opposite of the way I envisioned Patrick Kenzie. And yet I love the performance.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Casey made it his Patrick Kenzie. My Patrick Kenzie's still in the books. And they're both great. They can both exist in a parallel universe as long as the quality of the material's there. As long as it's a good movie and a good book, they can be different.
Gotcha. Now, I noticed that Clint Eastwood was the director for Mystic River.
Yeah.
And I was kind of thrown back a little bit by that. And I was like, this isn't exactly his universe, more or less.
No, it is. If you look at what Clint Eastwood has been charting, the decline of the American male now, for 50 years. Like, if you look at his films, he is looking at what are the myths we've been sold about what it is to be a man, and what is being a man, and in both and so everything from Unforgiven to Mystic River to The Mule to American Sniper to, all of these films. White Hunter, Black Heart was where he started to kind of really mess around with it. That's back in the 80s. He is looking at, what are the, what are the harmful and toxic myths we've been sold that create, a kind of a fractured identity.
So what do you enjoy most? Writing the novels, screenplays, being in TV, movies? You've got a very diverse career.
Yeah. And I like that. I don't think I have to pick one.
So no Sophie's choice,
There's no. I mean, if I had to have a Sophie's choice, I would say at this moment, you're talking to me right now, at this point in my life, I prefer film, TV, I should say. I prefer TV.
Okay.
Because it allows me to be social, which I missed for a very long time. Writing in just one room by myself. And B, it allows me to be a better father. I think a more attentive, a more present father, because books demand a different level of focus. And I, when I write a book, my best ideal situation writing a book is me rolling out of bed and bouncing into a chair with a cup of coffee ready for me, so that I can stay in the dream world, which is where I need to be to write a book. And any interruption of that, my day's work is done. My screenwriting work, my teleplays, that movies, whichever, I can get up, I can have breakfast, I can chat with some friends, I can drive my kids to school, I can chat with them, I can drop them off, I can come back home, I can, hang around, and then all of a sudden I can go and write the script on the 50-yard line of the Super Bowl. I can write a script anywhere, anytime, with no need for focus the same way, nothing, because a script is a blueprint. That's all
Interesting.
it is. So
now, alluding back to your writing, writing a novel, you say, you roll out of bed, and that's going to be one of the first things you do is start hammering away at this novel. Do you write every day when you're in a project like that?
I used to, but no, now it's all over the place. I've had to between these forays I've made now into TV and again, being a father changed everything for me. And it forced me to get very regimented as a writer, which I'd never been. And suddenly it's like, no, man, you got like a 2-hour window to work here,
Right.
And so that was, it's I don't know. I wish I could tell you what process is for me right now, but process is, there is no life work balance. Just bringing none, because I'm juggling a lot right now. I'm juggling a lot. And I have, there's a lot going on, a lot of projects on my deck. So
well, that's good. That's better than the opposite, right?
Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. And you gotta, it's a cliche, but it's true. If you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. It's like, I love what I do. I love what I do.
Good.
And I still can't believe the lunatics pay me for it.
So your early days, when you first started writing, when did you catch the bug? When was this something that you're like, hey, I want to be a writer?
I think I was doing it since I was very young, but then when I was 20, on the basis of dropping out of 2 colleges where I'd taken safety majors, I realized, this is the only thing I'm remotely good at. Like, I suck at everything. Like, I'm just not good at it. I can play a little pool, but that's about it. And so I just said, this is it. I got, my track was defined by that point. There was no place for me to step off. There was no place for me to say, hey, maybe I'll go try that. Maybe I'll go try that. I couldn't try any of those things because I wasn't good at anything. Only good at thinking stuff up and writing it down. That's pretty much it. And that became, once I made that decision, because I'm from such a a working class background, and it was such a leap. Nobody became a writer where I came from. Because it was such a leap, I knew I couldn't fail. That was it. I was all in. I was breakneck. And so the one thing that everybody who I ever was in school with talks about, it's the one word that comes back over and over and over again. The thing that separated me from the rest of the pack, it wasn't talent, it wasn't craftsmanship, it wasn't ability, it was focus. It was focus. I wanted it. There was no other place I was going. I didn't want to be a teacher. I couldn't be pulled over into the side of esoterica and critical thinking and any of that, because I didn't give a shit. I wanted to tell stories. That was it. And that's what I was going to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I sometimes say that to my daughter. I say, sometimes I hope for you guys to, suck at everything else except what you want to do.
So let me ask you this. Where were you and what were you doing when you realized that, hey, you want to be a writer and all that? When did you realize that, hey, this is a viable option for me to make a living? I can actually do this for a living. Do you remember that?
I knew that people thought of me by the time I was about 25, but that didn't mean I agreed with them. I was terrified. You believe I'm Irish. You can understand this. That means that if I get happy, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be, the next movement of my life is to be hit by a plane.
Yeah.
Car or something, Sputnik or something falling from the sky. So I was absolutely convinced up until the day it was published, until I saw on November 10th, 1994, I'll never forget this, seen it in the bookstore window, Waterstones, corner of Newbury Street and Exeter in Boston. I was absolutely sure that I would die before I saw my book in a window. It would never happen. I just knew it. You know what I mean? Something's going to happen. I'm going to get hit by a car. And that led all the way up to publication. It led, and then, so I would say, when did I know? Removing all the Irish doom and gloom and sense that you're going to die before you get to be happy, I think I knew. I got my book published. I got my book accepted for publication on my last day of coursework in grad school, literally my last day. Everybody else was lining up their next jobs. I wasn't doing anything. I was like, all I knew was I was moving back home. I was going to go back to Boston and I was going to get some other job and I was going to write another book. And then write about, literally as we would come. We were all about to go out to a bar that night in Miami, which is where I was in grad school. And everybody was talking about their jobs, their things that they lined up, and looking at me like, you're crazy. Like, you're crazy,
Well, what degree was your post-grad in?
I had an MFA.
Okay.
So what all my friends were doing was getting jobs teaching. They were
I was just going to say, that's like, teaching is kind of the logical next step.
Right. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And I remember talking to my mentor, getting in an argument with my mentor like 2 months earlier, where I was just like, he was like, why aren't you going to you would go to these conventions to get jobs. And he's like, why aren't you going to any of these things? I said, I don't want to teach. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, I don't want to teach, man. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And teach 5-6 classes as an adjunct just to make ends meet? Then I got to give tests and then I got to grade papers. What am I going to write? And he was like, well, what are you going to do? 10 bar? I remember that really clearly. And I was like, yes. I'll be happy to 10 bar. I'll do anything I have to do to focus only on writing. And I went back and I got a job as a valet in Boston, parking cars.
Well, there is nowhere to park in Boston. I was just there
Works out,
2 months ago.
Out, right. Well, we had a garage.
2 months ago, I was in Boston dog sitting for my daughter. She lives in Somerville.
Oh, okay.
So I decided to go in there.
Somerville's a whole other thing when it comes to parking. My car got booted in Somerville. I know all about Somerville. So I got a job parking cars and it was great. And I would go home at night And I would write, and I would get up in the morning and I would write, and I would go in 3 to 12 and park cars. And it was stupendous because I had that focus, exactly what I'm talking about. It was not, I didn't want to talk about writing. I didn't want to teach people how to write. I didn't want to do any of that. I just wanted to do it.
Sure. Now, skipping ahead to Small Mercies, your latest book.
Yep.
Is there a theme or a feeling that you wanted people to walk away from when they're done reading this?
Well, I think the book's the embodiment of, Martin Luther King's theory that the final victim of racism is going to be the racist. So he always said that at the end of the day, white racism, the racism of white people was going to eat white people. And that's exactly what I believe. And that's exactly what the book embodies. And in the end, it's about a legacy of hate. And if you pass it on generationally, all it's going to do is get more and more destructive to the people who practice it, not the other way around.
Now, do you do this intentionally with every book that you write?
No, God, no. No, if you go into a book knowing what you're trying to say, you're going to write a really bad book. Okay. No, I just organically, I knew I was writing a book about racism. I knew I was writing a book about what it was like in 1974 in the world I grew up in, where there was no quiet part. Everything was said aloud. And I thought it was an interesting prism through which to take a look at how we live now, where the quiet part is starting to not be said aloud. It's starting to be said aloud again, and how little it's changed.
Very good.
Well, thanks, man.
Thank you. Small Mercies comes out April 25th. The best of luck to you and the book. I'm sure it'll do great.
Thank you.
And thanks again for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks.
This episode is brought to you by Master Writer. Master Writer is a powerful collection of writing tools and references assembled in one easy-to-use program. Included are word families, phrases, synonyms, rhymes, definitions, figures of speech, pop culture, a searchable Bible of intensifiers, and a unique collection of intense descriptive words. Why struggle to find the right word when you can have all the possibilities in an instant? While a computer can't compete with the mind and imagination of a writer, the mind can't compete with the word choices that Master Writer will give you in an instant. When the two work together, great things happen. Check it out today at masterwriter.com.
I first wanted to start out by saying I really enjoyed talking to this guy. He was so down to earth, and we had a lot in common. We're both from Irish families. He grew up on the south side of Boston, where there's Southies. His book takes place in 1974 on the south side of Boston. And, there were Southies. And I grew up on the south side of Chicago in an Irish neighborhood, because both my parents are from Ireland. So we had a lot in common. It was a lot of fun talking to him. And we started out by talking about descriptions. He even had like the ashtrays down. We started talking about, like the ashtrays, and that just brought back huge flashbacks for me from my childhood. And I could tell he was totally on board with all that. But, he talked about, he sets the stage for readers with these descriptions, but he's also doing it for himself as a writer. What do you guys do to set the stage? Or do you consciously do that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think everybody should read this book, even if you don't normally read Dennis Lehane. Just if you're a writer and you want to learn how to describe a scene, a place, a person, anything like that. I mean, he is phenomenal at it. Like I read so many books, and I opened up this one, and I was like a page or two in, and it was just like you said. Like I was in 1974. Like I could see orange shag carpet everywhere. You could smell the cigarette smoke. It was just there. And the funny thing was, like he's not. He's about the same age as me. I think he was 9 in 1974, if I'm doing the math right. But he describes it so incredibly vividly. It's like stepping into a time machine. And, once you read the book, and it's an incredibly good book, go back through it with a highlighter as a writer and go, this is how he did this. This is how he did that. Because he does it so well. He does it with a minimal amount of words. He doesn't need a paragraph to put you there. He can do it with a couple of words. it's incredible. I wish I was that good at it. I wish I had an answer for you on your question. He's the master. I got to default to him. I mean, that's my general thinking. When I read a book like this, I read it once as entertainment, then I flip it back to the first page and I go through with the highlighter, and I try to figure out how he did what he did so that I could replicate it.
I think it's important to keep in mind what type of story you're telling. In this case, like it's basically a period piece kind of thing. Like it's setting up something that the average reader today may or may not have any experience with. So the details about the ashtray and that sort of thing are important because, some readers today may not even know what an ashtray is. And that's a genuine thing. Like, they're just not something you see very often anymore. You especially don't see them in like hotels and things anymore. So those details become important for setting that scene, and you're gonna have to introduce that to certain readers. But I always worry, like if it was a more contemporary story, I don't know that I would include details like that, because my big worry is that I'm going to date the book somehow. And maybe if I just treat everything like I'm writing period fiction to be read at a later date, maybe that problem is solved.
Yeah, I think you have to decide early on what type of book you're writing. So like he specifically decided this book was going to take place in 1974. So it's just there. And right. Mystic River is the same type of vibe, like you're in another place, another time when you read that book, and when you close the cover, you're back to the norm again. If you're trying to write a thriller or a modern day story, something that takes place today, and you want it to always feel like it's taking place today, that's tricky too. I mean, everything is evolving so incredibly fast. You could write a story today and, it's going to feel outdated 2 or 3 years from now. So you have to decide whether, how much of those modern, technologies you want to mention. And cause they're going to ground you. They're going to kind of fix your timeline.
I mean, thinking about it, you've got like that nostalgic aspect that you can apply to those pieces where you're clearly describing some type of sensation or feeling that is being reflected through the physical, observations around you. Same concept with fantasy. When you want to create a fantastical world that's lived in, you have these monuments and this dialogue that really describe these things as if they've been aeons old and whatnot, as opposed to, urban fantasy where you do a lot of shorthand. You say warehouse and everyone knows what a warehouse looks like. So I think it's really applicable to the genre that you're writing, and if the location itself has some type of essence to it that you want the reader to feel.
Yeah, some of the verbiage, calling the television the boob tube, I haven't heard that for I don't know how long. That's what my grandpa used to call the television. I'm just like, oh my God, I laughed out loud when I read that.
I wonder if something like that is going to, if maybe something like that is going to inadvertently offend certain readers. Because they don't know what you mean by it.
It's funny you mentioned offending people, because this guy doesn't care about offending people. He's not an asshole. He's a very nice man with a big heart. But, I asked him, I said, here's a quote. Every Southie comes out of the womb with a Schlitz and a Lucky Strike. And I laughed out loud at that. And I asked him, I said, do you fear pushback from that? And he says, no. Yeah. Not at all. He says, people are he was very unapologetic about it, and it fitted the story. He wasn't doing it for shock value. It fit the story.
Yeah, that's the color of language.
I mean, I totally agree with what he said. I think, first of all, if you want to try to write along those lines, I think it's important you do your research. Like I said, he was 9 years old in 1974. So a lot of, driving a car in 1974, things like that. He wasn't familiar with how to do that. He had to research it. He had to figure it out. We've got, Google nowadays, so it's easy. You can jump on Google and you can find out what phrases were common in 1974. I can guarantee boob tube was on there. What were people doing? What were they drinking? All those types of things. You ask those questions and get those answers in front of you, and that's how you paint that picture. What events were in the news? You have to make sure you're aware of all of that. If you're playing, you are creating a world like JP said, but you're basically creating a world inside of a world that's already existed. So you've already got a roadmap. So it's easier than fantasy. You don't have to make anything up. It's all, it's all available to you. And that being said, I think you have to decide, are you going to be okay with, what that entails. People used language back then that, would offend people. One of the things that somebody mentioned to me the other day, like today, a black person is typically called a person of color. If you go back 20 or 30 years, they were called a colored person. It's literally one word different. But, like you called somebody that today and they would be offended, and 20 years from now, like the language is going to change again.
Yes.
Like JP, you refer to yourself as queer. Like when I was growing up, if you used that word, you'd get the crap beat out of you. It took on a different meaning, and, nobody knows what that word is going to mean 20 years from now. So you have to, in this case, dive back into 1974. What was the language? Go ahead and use it. People talk to them, to other people in a certain way, make sure you embrace it 100%. I think that's how you make it authentic. You can't let somebody in today's world, 2023, tell you what was going on in 1974.
I was going to say that you should probably aim to strike some kind of balance when it comes to the terminology you use as far as using it for setting, because a modern audience may have no clue what you're referring to. But then, JD, you said you compared it to world building, and now I've changed my mind, because I think just like in a fantasy novel, like people will, a good author will introduce concepts that are going to be completely foreign to the reader, but through context and over time, the reader figures out, they either figure out the meaning of the term or it becomes acceptable as just, a doohickey or what, something, so it just becomes part of the landscape at that point. So I think when it comes to offending people, I'm not particularly worried about offending anybody, because it's just too easy to do. I've offended people completely by accident by things that I thought were entirely benign. So I'm not going to police my writing to make sure that everything is unobjectionable. I just think that's a fast path to weak writing. If you're really worried about it, get a sensitivity reader or something along those lines, someone along those lines to go back and point out troublesome areas. But personally, I'm not really worried about it.
Yeah, it's funny. I honestly think the sensitivity readers are part of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't believe in them one bit, because
my thinking is, unless if I'm going to get somebody, if I'm writing a book in 1974, if I'm going to hire somebody, and whether they're a sensitivity reader or not, I need an expert on 1974. I don't need somebody that's an expert on 2023 weighing in on what's going to, fly and what's not going to fly. I need somebody who's going to tell me this is correct, this isn't correct for that period for 1974. A lot of the stuff that I read now is distilled down. Like I had a book the other day I was reading. It was set in the South in the 60s, and you could tell that it went through sensitivity reader hell. Like they just completely redlined probably half the original novel and changed a lot of it. The dialogue was altered and watered down, and it took away from the story. And it's fiction. I think it needs to be authentic. Disservice. Yeah, it needs to stay authentic.
Yeah, that's such a disservice to the reader, because what you're doing is robbing the reader of making their own judgment, and you're taking away part of the experience in the name of someone else's sensibilities. I just think that that's a horrible way to approach writing. You're just not being authentic at that point. That's, I don't know. I find that offensive, actually.
As a potential.
Go ahead, JP, school me.
As a potential dissenting voice to the conversation, I think that there's a level of what type of audience you want and what genre you are writing in. And I say this because it depends on who you're writing it for. If I'm writing cozy queer novels, I'm going to restrain on some of the derogatory or microaggressions towards queer people. That's an intentional thing regardless of the time period, because
that's a very good point.
I, as a reader, if I'm trying to read something and I want to feel comfortable, I don't need to be constantly reminded whether or not there's a risk of injury to the character. So for example, I have my own personal fears of holding my partner's hand out in the street because of the risk of violence. I don't need to be reminded of that issue. I can happily read a story that wouldn't have existed in the 1950s and pretend that those things didn't exist because I just want to experience the time period. I think that it is entirely dependent on what that audience is that you're trying to capture and what kind of feeling you're trying to drive towards it. I think there is a place for both of them. And I think that that's really the gist of it.
So to change gears, he was talking about selling novels to specific producers in television instead of studios. He was protective of his work, and he's like, okay, I'd rather sell to a specific producer that he likes their work as opposed to a specific studio. Is that something that you do, JD, or what does that look like?
Well, Dennis is obviously way further along in this process than I am. He's he's a very well-known showrunner at this point, writer, director, like all these different things. He's done it. He's proved that he can do it very well. And he's a strong voice out in Hollywood when it comes to this sort of thing. I'm not that guy. So I'm very similar to what he had mentioned early on in the career. Like it's, a matter of just finding the right partner, somebody you can trust, a company that you can trust. And, you have to be willing to hand it off and trust those people to do their thing with it. The difference is he's been there, done that, so many different times, he can call somebody out on it. Like he had mentioned with the director, if he's watching a director who's not getting the right performance out of the actor or the actress, and he knows how to get that performance out of that person, early on in his career, he might not have raised his hand. He would have just let it play out. In today's world, because he's been in that director's seat and he understands how to get it done, not only will he raise his hand, but he'll step up and actually show them how to get it done, which I think is important too. But, it all comes from experience. For the most part, everybody in Hollywood, they really know what they're doing. Like they end up in those roles because of that. The competition is so fierce. You have nothing but the best of the best, when it gets to the point of actually making a film or a TV show. So you can be comfortable in trusting them to get it done.
So JD, who's up for next week?
Next week, we've got Victor Manibo on. He's a speculative fiction writer. His latest book is called The Sleepless, and he'll be here to tell us all about it.
So if you'd like to be notified as soon as our new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com, sign up now, and we'll see you next episode, and have a great week of writing.
Do you want to write crime stories that are accurate and believable, but lack firsthand experience in law enforcement? Join Cop Camp, the Cops and Writers interactive conference, and experience what real-life police officers and detectives do through hands-on activities this June 1st through the 4th at the Fox Valley Police Academy in Appleton, Wisconsin. Limited class size of 30 to 40 students ensures an immersive, interactive experience. Attend firearm simulations, drive a squad car, solve mock crime scenes, and use real CSI tools, and more. Register now at premeditatedfiction.com/CopCamp 2023 and take your crime writing to the next level.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.